Hi, I'm WTOP film critic Jason Fraley, and all month long we've been ranking the best movies in every genre. 30 genres, over 30 days, and can you believe it? We're finally at the end. My favorite, Westerns. Now, when you think Westerns, the first ones that come to mind are those classics. We're talking John Ford, the great director John Ford. Won Best Director multiple times, and there's a reason why. Go back and check out his breakthrough movie, Stagecoach 1939, where John Wayne broke through as the Ringo Kid, but he also he did some interesting things with some of the archetypes there, with the boozy lawyer and all the people that get on the stagecoach. He kind of subverts conventions there a little bit, and in an odd way, it's still archetypal. We also get My Darling Clementine by John Ford, where Henry Fonda is rocking on the rocking chair as Wyatt Earp, and the whole Doc Holliday gunfight at OK Corral kind of thing that we later saw in Tombstone, also on the list. But go back and check out, I think, the best version, My Darling Clementine. And also for John Ford, we get The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Of course, Liberty Valance is the villain played by Lee Marvin, but the real juice here is that it's called The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance because everyone thinks it's Jimmy Stewart's Eastern lawyer and he launches a political career, but really it was John Wayne's rugged individualist hanging out in the shadows who actually shot him. So it's sort of a case of mistaken identity. But there's a lot of those push-pull struggles of, and to me that's why I think the Western's the most fascinating genre, of the rugged individualism. We're gonna go west, young man, represented by John Wayne in this movie. But then when you get there, what do? You have to settle, and you have to domesticate, and you build churches and schools and a community. And so Liberty Valance has that great push-pull between John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart's character that I think totally represents the Western genre, with the great line, when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. In addition to John Ford on the classic side, we also have Howard Hawks. Of course, Red River. John Wayne and Montgomery Clift in 1948 on that great cattle drive. But my favorite Hawks Western is actually Rio Bravo. Again, John Wayne. He's going to show up a lot here. But this is 1959 with Angie Dickinson, never better. Also Dean Martin. It's just a great classic Western in color there. Of course, other directors make it, like Sturges. We had John Sturges' Magnificent Seven with that great Bernstein score, classic stuff. We get 3:10 to Yuma, True Grit, Winchester 73 by Anthony Mann, who made several great ones like Naked Spur and a bunch, Man of the West, but I think this was his best. Johnny Guitar by Nicholas Ray, where Joan Crawford starting to see a little feminism starting to get into Westerns here. And then, of course, of the classics, you can't forget High Noon by Fred Zinnemann, who tells the whole story in real time. So we're watching the ticking clock of the 2 hours as Gary Cooper tries to get everyone in town to help him out. He leaves his honeymoon with Grace Kelly because duty calls. He has to go back to become sheriff, even after he's retired. Goes around town trying to get people to help him because he knows the bad guys that he locked away years ago are coming in on the noon train at high noon, but no one will help him. So as the clock ticks in real time to that great Tex Ritter score, the Ballad of High Noon, do not forsake me, oh my darling. It's just classic stuff. And also a McCarthyism allegory with blacklisting and no one wanting to help. And then, of course, the last one here, Shane. George Stevens, one of my favorite directors. He's in the class of great directors, but I think he's even underrated amongst the great directors. I think he's so great. Shane, Alan Ladd, rides into town. Little young Brandon DeWitt idolizes him. But it's so much about gunplay in America, and just the way that the gunshots have the people, they actually had little harnesses tied to them, and they would yank them back really hard. Jack Palance walks in almost ghostly as the villain in the end. It's just great stuff. And then as Shane, wounded, rides off into the sunset, into the horizon, the little boy, Shane, come back. It's classic stuff. Now, those were some great classic archetypal Westerns like High Noon and Shane. But then you'll notice that around the 60s, we started seeing filmmakers, it's like everything had been done in the Western genre, so now we're going to start breaking the rules and get edgier, which of course is influenced by all the French New Wave and all the edgier tactics overseas that made their way back here to America. So we get movies like the spaghetti westerns by Italian filmmaker Sergio Leone, who was a big fan of the old westerns and even some of the Kurosawa like samurai stuff, but he puts it all together and makes the good, the bad, and the ugly. Wow, 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 wow. Everyone knows that. I'm going to save talking about that till the top 3 because it's got to be in there. But right now we'll talk about Once Upon a Time in the West. Also high on my top 10. It is such a great movie, especially the opening there, that whole opening sequence where they're waiting for them to come in. And we get Henry Fonda, this time as a villain. We'd seen him so many, Tom Joad and Juror Number 8. You think of him as the great American hero, but here he's a villain. Sort of a silent but deadly one, and then Charles Bronson as harmonica, sticking the harmonica in his mouth. It's just an amazing piece of work. One of the great spaghetti westerns. We also get Sam Peckinpah, Bloody Sam they called him, in movies like The Wild Bunch. Here's 1969. Right during the Vietnam War, I think that's why the violence is really upticking in these westerns. They're reflecting and commenting on that. But man, the way that Peckinpah cuts around, yes, it's going to be too violent. Even today, it might be too violent for a lot of you guys. So pack your, not patience, but, bring it on when you get ready to sit down to watch this, because it's pretty violent stuff. But I like to view it as a bloody ballet. The way that a lot of the gunfights happen in slow motion, or he'll intercut something 3 different times. So let's say, a guy gets shot falling off his horse, for instance, and as he's falling, we cut to something else, and then we cut back and he's falling a little more, and then we cut to something else and he's falling a little more. There's a lot of these acid intercuts, triple intercuts that Easy Rider and other movies made that same year, but Peckinpah was so great. And there's just great symbolism with like the scorpions, and even that finale when they do their big walk to death with William Holden and Ernest Borgnine, and it's just a powerful piece of work. And shout out to Mike Srego, who was my mentor at the Baltimore Sun, his favorite movie of all time, The Wild Bunch. And then finally, for the rule breakers, we get to Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, 1992. This won Best Picture in 92, and Eastwood, he'd made so many great ones, including other ones on the list like Outlaw Josie Wales, and Good, Bad, the Ugly, of course, he was in, starring for other directors. But with Unforgiven, he said, I'm going to set out to bury the Western. He said, I've done it all. The genre's been played out to death, and I'm going to seek to bury this sucker by subverting all of the conventions. So instead of the ultimate hero badass that he played in all the other ones, now he's a drunk, retired gunfighter who falls off of his horse and can't seem to do everything right. Morgan Freeman is his sidekick, which subverts conventions not only for having an African-American cowboy, but he gets ready to pull the trigger and he says, I just can't do it. So we have Eastwood falling off his horse and Morgan Freeman unable to shoot. You would not see that in the old Westerns. But then, of course, by the end, it's sort of, he said, what does he say? It's a hell of a thing killing a man. You take away all he's got and all he's ever going to have. So we really tried to bury the Western, but in the end, of course, after Gene Hackman's corrupt cop, again, the lawman is the bad, another subverted convention. After Gene Hackman, does a really corrupt thing to Morgan Freeman, Eastwood, of course, rides back into town, into the saloon, and we do get that badass side that we're used to seeing from him. But watch as he looks into the saloon mirror. He can't see his own reflection. It's a subtle hint that Eastwood does as a director, but at this point, he can't see his reflection because he is doomed. He is, what's the title? Unforgiven. Now, of all those great Westerns, so many of them could have easily been in the top 3, but I went with my personal 3 favorites. So number 3, it's a lighthearted one, the best buddy comedy of all time, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It's Robert Redford and Paul Newman were the greatest buddy team of all time, hands down, and I'll fight you if you want to say it's somebody else. No, I mean, come on, that and The Sting, I mean, they're so great. So of course, Newman is Butch Cassidy, Redford is the Sundance Kid, which is why he called it the Sundance Film Fest. To me, that has to be in the top 3 because it literally gave us the name for the ultimate indie fest, the Sundance, because he played Sundance. But more than just legacy, it is, and the famous song Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head by B.J. Thomas. But more than any of that, it is just the way that it's directed by George Roy Hill and written by William Goldman. I think probably one of the top 10 scripts of all time. It's just sparkling dialogue through this whole thing. Like they're bickering and bantering up on the cliff. They're getting pursued, and so they need to jump off the cliff into the water. And he says, "What? I can't swim." And Newman just looks at him and goes, "Well, swim. The fall alone will kill you." And then they're like, "Oh," and then they say the big curse word, the S word, as they're plummeting into the water and then splash. It's so great. But there's other little moments too, where George Roy Hill, sort of the idea of slow disclosure, where we see Redford at the very beginning of the movie. It's dark out and he goes inside a woman's house. It's Catherine Ross from The Graduate. as at a place. He comes in and holds her at gunpoint and says, strip him. And you're like, oh no, is he gonna assault this woman? And she's doing it, and he's looking all stern, and she's taking it off. And then at the end, it's about time you got home, and then they kiss, and then, it's so, and so it was like a little role play thing. But there's just so many moments like that, directing wise and script wise, that to me elevates it in the top 3. Butch and Sundance. All right, number 2. We mentioned it earlier, but Sergio Leone's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. This movie, not only the famous theme song that we mentioned, dare say the most iconic, recognizable theme of any theme in any genre, if you really think about it. You hear a couple notes, you're like, oh, Good, Bad, and the Ugly. In fact, not just the movie, but, oh, that's the Western. Think of a theme, Ennio Morricone. Think of a theme that more symbolizes its genre, and I'll give you a fistful of dollars. But no, Good, Bad, and the Ugly is so great. Eastwood is the strong silent type. It's his third in the Fistful of Dollars, the trilogy, with The Man with No Name, which was Fistful of Dollars for a Few Dollars More, and now Good, Bad, and the Ugly. But Eastwood is the good. Levi and Cleef is the bad, murdering the guy through the pillow. And then Eli Wallach is the ugly, who says, when you have to shoot, don't talk, shoot. And then, of course, it ends to the big three-way showdown in the cemetery at the end, where Morricone's the other theme comes up with the it's another, as if the main theme isn't famous enough, we get that other one, where they do Leone shoots it by showing all the close-ups of just a hand on a gun or just the eyes, or, it's really classic filmmaking stuff that you'd seen Tarantino do in Reservoir Dogs and so many other filmmakers. It's just so influential. But it's just one of the great movies of all time. Music, imagery, actors, it launched Eastwood's career. Has to go number 2, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And for me, number 1, John Ford's The Searchers. I can't say enough good things about this movie. It's deceptively great. And it's almost fitting that we're ending our entire Best Movies series with this movie, because my admission, this was the movie that was my epiphany movie back about, 15 years ago in undergrad. I had a professor throw this movie, John Wayne, throws this picture up on the screen, and I watch it. I was like, that was a fun 2-hour romp, cowboy and Indian movie that I would watch any Saturday with my grandpa. That was fun. And then, oh my God, the professor gets back up there and, frame by frame, shot by shot, just literally in the first 10, 15 minutes, there's a whole nother story, several other stories going on just with the visual language that aren't even really in the script. So I encourage you to go back. Even in those first couple minutes, we see that John Wayne, who rides up to his brother and sister-in-law's ranch, Martha, in the opening shot, he rides up and, the family gets slaughtered, and that's why he has to go on a search. So you think it's a search. But really in those opening minutes, the reason that it's driving his revenge against the Comanches in the movie is because there's a secret, just visually how it's shot, he has a secret love affair with his sister-in-law, Martha. And it makes you even wonder, maybe they're his kids too. Maybe that's why he's got, but it's not, this is the 50s, so you couldn't overtly say it, but watch. John Wayne and Martha are always grouped together in 2 shots, while his brother is actually, always by himself. The way they're positioned, like touching hands, like as they reach for a lamp on the fireplace. The way that, when the sister-in-law and his brother go to bed at night, and she's like, he looks through the doorways, and he has to sit outside like he's the Western drifter, and he has to look in, and as they go to bed, but she's kind of like gently fondling his jacket, his Civil War coat. There's so many cool little directing things that is just amazing. And we mentioned the title, The Searchers. It's one of those titles where on the surface, you think they're searchers. Him and Jeffrey Hunter, John Wayne and Jeffrey Hunter are going to look for young Natalie Wood, who's been kidnapped by Comanches. But really, symbolically, every great movie is about one thing on the surface, but about another under the surface. And so on the surface, it's this search, but underneath, it's soul searchers. It's John Wayne in his most complex role. Famous lines, that'll be the day. But most complex because the whole movie is him trying to overcome his own racism and prejudice against Native Americans. His sidekick, his nephew, who he calls, quote, half-breed, offensively, who's part Comanche, they learn to love him. The whole search is his soul searching, overcoming his own demons, to not only befriend and become a father figure to Jeffrey Hunter, but in the end, when he lifts Natalie Wood, who has been living with Comanches for these many years, as he's running towards her, you don't know if he's going to kill her. I mean, Hunter's yelling, "Ethan, no, Ethan!" You think he's going to kill him, and then he picks her up, and in that moment, he has a flashback to her childhood and says, "Let's go home, Debbie." And in that moment, he has overcome his racial prejudice. And for 1956, the same year as Giant was talking about racial issues with Latinos on the border, to have these two movies wade into that territory is very, very ahead of its time. We're 7 years before I Have a Dream. We are 4 years before To Kill a Mockingbird was published. This is way ahead of its time stuff. And literally you watch John Wayne, who's a Confederate soldier in this, or an ex-Confederate. The war's over, but he goes from Confederate grays and reds, wearing those colors, all the way to Union blues in the final shot, and those famous bookends, looking out the silhouetted doorway as he walks off into the distance. To me, it's iconic, and I can't think of a more fitting way to end the series than that image of John Wayne walking away into the distance, having overcome his racial prejudice, the entire Western theme, and not only Western, but America's struggle in general, overcoming our original sin of racism and slaughtering Native Americans. If this list and this series can help us to look at how the camera lens can help us overcome some of our sins of the past, but also embracing all these great cultural things, westerns and horror movies and thrillers and romances and all the genres we've talked about. If we can walk away into the West, out that door as it closes to that Roy Rogers song. If we can do that, then I think hopefully this will have all been worth it. So #1 of all time on the Westerns, The Searchers. Well, that's it. Thanks for coming along on this journey for 30 genres over 30 days. I hope we had some of your favorites in there. We had to make a lot of tough cuts, but in the end, I think this is 750 must-see movies and my personal favorites and the ones I respect the most. So thanks for joining us, and we're going to finish it off tomorrow on August 31st at noon with a Facebook Live. So get your questions ready. I want to hear what you think about this entire month-long journey, what we got right, what we got wrong. Tell me how much of an idiot I was, what I should have put on there with your favorites that we left off, and we'll wrap up this series in style.